Movies, series, and books set in medieval universes are amazing, and I openly admit that it's one of my favorite settings. Even when we step out of fiction and look at real human history, we often come across fascinating stories from that time period. Some of these stories may have tragic endings, like the tale of Joan of Arc or the Knights Templar. But if we move away from the realm of kings, queens, churches, heroes, and villains, what would the life of an ordinary person in the Middle Ages be like? What would the daily life of a common individual entail during that time? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Interesting Day. In today's video, we will discuss the daily lives of people in the Middle Ages, or simply put, what it was like to live in a dangerous and violent era, filled with ignorance and injustice, among other things. Nowadays, in our society, there are four basic pillars for a good quality of life: security, education, health, and leisure. Throughout this video, we will see that none of these existed in the Middle Ages. To begin with, there was obviously no electricity, and any nighttime illumination was poor, relying on torches or candles at best, which provided very little light. As a result, everyone went to bed early, shortly after nightfall, and woke up very early, along with the rising sun, to start working. There were several popular professions during that time. The blacksmith, the peasant who planted crops and raised animals, the barber, the messenger who carried information between kingdoms or cities, the soldier, the lumberjack, the tailor, the merchant, and many other different occupations. However, there was one particular profession that all the others despised: the tax collector. A tax collector was responsible for going from house to house, periodically collecting taxes. These taxes were theoretically meant to cover the kingdom's expenses, such as maintaining an army, which is quite expensive due to the costs of food, equipment, and supplies for long journeys, among other things. However, these tax collectors were often corrupt and demanded much higher amounts from people than what was stipulated by the king or emperor. Taxes were collected in various ways. When a family was very poor and didn't have money, for example, the tax collector could take food, animals, or even objects from their home. Those who couldn't afford or refused to pay taxes would have everything taken by force, be expelled, or even worse, enslaved. It all depended on where you lived and the time period we're talking about. In addition to these professions, there were also some other rather curious ones. For instance, the candlemaker, who made candles, and the court jester, a kind of clown for the king's entertainment. There was also the rat hunter. Throughout human history, rats have been considered a plague, as they would gnaw and consume everything, especially during the Middle Ages when food was already scarce and needed to be stored. Imagine discovering that all the food you stored for winter had been spoiled by rats. And there's one more detail about rats that we'll soon talk about. In the workplace, children were not exempt. From the moment a child could hold a tool, they would start working. After all, it was a cruel and miserable time, and having a child meant having another mouth to feed. So, it was a relief for parents when their children started helping with farming, taking care of animals, running errands on the streets, and more. Remember that we mentioned leisure, safety, education, and health? Let's now examine each of these aspects, one at a time, starting with leisure. Leisure was practically non-existent in people's lives during the Middle Ages. We can summarize their lives as working, eating, and sleeping, a never-ending cycle of work, eat, and sleep. People at most had fun during annual events when the king or the church decided to throw a celebration to commemorate something like the changing of a season or a victorious war. Those were the times when festivities took place. Speaking of safety, those who lived in the feudal lands surrounding the castle or in the suburbs of the kingdom's capital had some level of protection. After all, a king wouldn't want to be attacked and have his lands conquered. So, There were plenty of soldiers around, providing a certain level of security for those living in these important cities. However, the shadow of fear of war still loomed. We all know that until the 20th century, humanity experienced war after war, and the further back we go in time, the more wars occur. Regarding education, during this time, there was no printing press or any other form of printing. Therefore, not only was all paper made manually, but every book was also handwritten. It could take months or even years to complete the production of a book. As a result, books were extremely expensive. Therefore, access to reading, studying, and education was controlled by the church. Knowing how to read and write was a privilege reserved only for those in the clergy or the royal family. This meant that even powerful figures sometimes remained illiterate. Lastly, we come to what I consider the worst aspect among these four to be observed: health. The scientific advancements we have today did not exist during that time. When someone dared to speak about subjects like astronomy, they were persecuted and silenced by the church. Some were even killed. The church believed that diseases should be cured through prayers, faith, and religious rituals. In the past, people didn't have any idea that hygiene is important. The discovery of microorganisms that can cause diseases was still far from happening. As a result, absurd things occurred. Without access to running water, people didn't have the habit of bathing. They could go for months without washing themselves. And when they did, it was usually the whole family bathing together, whether in a lake, marsh, or communal bathrooms in the cities. Everyone used the same water, so if one person had a contagious disease or something that could infect others, everyone would be affected. There were also countless rats in these polluted medieval cities. People considered rats as pests because they would gnaw and eat everything. What they didn't know is that besides that, rats also transmit diseases. During the Middle Ages, food was stored for the arrival of winter, mainly. Families had to rely on what was planted, harvested, and preserved for that time. As months passed, this food would naturally decay, but it couldn't be discarded. So, as you may have guessed, families consumed rotten, spoiled, sour, and moldy food. There was no sanitation, and obviously, there were no toilets either. People would relieve themselves, once again, in communal bathrooms in the city, or if they were at home, there were boxes for excrement. Due to these excrement boxes, many families used to keep pigs at home. They would empty the boxes into pig pens, and the pigs would eat it. And if someone didn't have pigs at home, they would simply throw the contents of the box out of the window. Imagine the smell of the streets during the Middle Ages. Due to all these misfortunes, infant mortality in the Middle Ages was very high, and life expectancy was very low. In some parts of Europe, infant mortality reached 45%, meaning that out of every 10 babies born, 4 or 5 would die. And even if you managed to reach adulthood, due to all the diseases, hunger, war, winter cold, and other hardships of that era, life expectancy was only 30 years. So, if you could go back in time, would you like to take a vacation in the Middle Ages? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for joining us on Interesting Day. See you next time.